In episode 30, as we learned back in part 1, Snarfer, who's Snarf's nephew who was earlier kidnapped from the planet of Snarfs because of Rattaro and his group of mutants. Good news for the Thundercats: when they arrived at the castle Plundarr, they managed to rescue Snarfer. So now that both nephew and uncle are reunited, so that's where part 2 begins. So back with the Ratstar that is out of commission since back in part 1, thanks to Lionel, the mutants ran out is because of the control room's explosion. The last to be out of the ship is Rattaro, who told the mutants it's safe to come out now. So after the mutants came out of hiding from behind a rock, that's when Slide, the leader of the mutants, stepped forward to Rattaro to plead his case to say, "This is all your fault." Now, Monkey and Jackalman started to agree with Slide. Then Slide continues to plead his case to say, if I were in the command instead of you, then Ratstar, as Sly says in his case, would have destroyed Lionel right about now. So Slythe went further to speak in his case to Rattaro to say since he failed in his mission, he says that he's going to take over as soon as he's done with Vultureman. So back with Rattaro, after he heard this from Slythe, he got very upset with him and his mutants, except for Vultureman, who runs right behind him. So what Rattaro did next is that he took out his rat size, and they started to summon up the power. And when mutants saw what had happened, they turned to run away. But not if Rattaro can do something about it. He uses his rat size one at a time, one for Jackalman, one for Muckin, and one for Sly, the leader of the mutants, and they were levitated in the air. So long story short, back with Voltman, he just saw what had happened. Back with the mutants that were caught in the rat-sized powers, that's when Slide, the leader of the mutants, just pleaded his case to say he and his mutants are going to crash, and Rattoro's doing it. So back with Voltman, who started to plead a case, but then Rattoro says, "Don't bother me. I'm concentrating." Then Voltman asked him a question. Shouldn't we just let them off with a warning? The reason why Voltman was asking Rotaro is because he suggested that the mutants can gather the remains of the Ratstar and salvage it whenever possible. So when Rotaro had thought about Voltman's suggestion and thought it was a good idea, the mutants could build a mute tank out of the remains of the ship. So finally Rotaro agrees. So Rattaro started pleading his case to the mutants to say, now you know who's in charge and who you're dealing with. I want the mute tank operational after it was built, right away. So the mutants went ahead and went right to work. So meanwhile in Caste's lair at the control room, as I explained earlier, since back in part 1, since Nurse been rescued by the Thundercats, so, after his uncle had reprimanded him for almost touching the controls in the control room, that's when Snarf was asking Snarfer, "Tell me more about the planet of Snarfs." But before Snarfer can explain, that's when Snarfer had refused to believe in his uncle's claims of being his home. That's when Snarfer says, "You have a home right here on Third Earth," he said. Now, Snarfer just said that he wanted to go back to his home on the planet of Snarfs, but now he just said in his case he'll never see it again. Don't worry, Snarfer, Snarf says. We'll get you home somehow, and maybe I can go along with you if you want, he suggested. You will? Snarfer asked. So when Snarfer had pleaded his case to ask him why, that's when Snarf pleaded a case to his nephew to say, well, Lionel's all grown up now, and since that's the case, Snarf said, now he's afraid that he'll no longer be needed since, after all this time, Snarf's been like a nursemaid to Lionel and of course his companion as well. Also in Snarf's case, according to what he told his nephew, he's just in the way, and now he's scared. So Snarfer was overjoyed to see that his uncle will be joining him. And of course, Snarf says, oh, speaking of which, I'm going to collect that 50 Thunder bucks. So meanwhile, at the Ratstar and with the mutants, that's when Voltron says, oh, cheer up, Slithe. This mutank is going to be the best arsenal vehicle yet, he said. So long story short, after Rattoro told the mutants to stay back, that's when Voltron steps forward with the remote control. He hands it to Rattoro and said that this remote control can help with the transformation to make the Ratstar into a mutank, he said. So back with Rattoro, after Voltron gave him the remote control, he didn't hesitate to use it. So he told the rest of the mutants, Sly, Monkey, and Jackalman, behold, the mutank. So with the help of the remote control, let's just say the mutank has done its job building itself thanks to Rattoro and the use of a remote control. So now that the mutank is finished, that's when Sly pleaded his case with Voltron to say, if this mutank is working like it said it would, just like the way it looks, maybe I can forgive you for this. Enough chit chat, Red Toro said. Use those grapplers immediately. We're going to tow this Ratstar's wreckage back to Castle Plundarr, Red Toro said. And so the three mutants went ahead and did what Rattoro said to do, used the grapplers to attach it to the mutank. And so the mutants pulled and pulled and pulled, and the mutank had pulled. So they took the red Ratstar back to Castle Plundarr so they could have it fixed up. So meanwhile, in the Castler's hangar, remember the two Snarfs that just left the control room had just arrived there since back in part 1. Also, as we learned back in part 1, that's when Snarf told Panthro that there must be a way to get Snarfer home somehow, and Panthro said that he's working on it. So what Lionel wanted to know from Snarf, why is he so keen all of a sudden? And then he said, I thought you said nothing that we'll do will get you in the Feliner. I know I did, Snarf said. Now remember back in part 1, that's when Snarf says that he really likes to visit the planet of Snarfs. Then Panthro dismissed him and says, what you want is the 50 Thunderbucks that you want back. And like I said since back in part 1, Snarf's not amused with Panthro's joke and said there must be a way to get Snarfer home. Well, Panthro also said that all the feliner needs is the hyperspace mechanism. That's the same part that the Thundercats have been talking about since part 1. Of course, according to Lionel, that's the part, unfortunately, must be found immediately because he says that without it, there's no way to get Snarfer home and no way that the feliner can be operational in any way. Then Snarf says that he has some good news. There is a place where you can find a Mechanicanizer only on one condition. If Panthro can promise him never to call him Osbert again, in which Panthro agrees. So Snarf says, I know this sounds crazy, but the only place I can think of getting the Hyper Mechanizer is from the wrecked Ratstar. Now remember, that's the exact same ship that was out of commission since part 1. So after hearing the good news, that's when Lionel and Panther says, then there's no time to waste and we had to get there immediately. So that's what happened. And so the Thunder Tank heads off to the crash site to where the Ratstar had crashed since back in part 1. Meanwhile, the Black Pyramid at the tomb chamber, Mumm-ra had just pleaded himself a case to say, so, the Thundercats are after the Mecha Condenser Ray. Also, he was watching it happen in his cauldron. He also pleaded himself a case to say that the mutants had no idea that the Thundercats had since back in part 1 needed it for their Feliner, which is the second vehicle on the list that Panthro had finished since back in part 1. So you're probably wondering, what was Mumm-ra's plan? Well, to keep the Thundercats from getting their hands on it. So he does what he knows best, transform himself to his monstrous form with a little help from his agent spirits of evil, of course. So after that, Mumm-ra had pleaded his case to say if they wanted to have her make a cadet, they had to go through him because, as he says, he needed it as bait to destroy the Thundercats. And why is that? Because that's part of the plan. So back with the Thundercats and the Thunder Tank, by the time they arrived at the crash site, they had no idea that the mutants, including Rattoro, had already moved the Ratstar somewhere else. So Panthro finds this very hard to believe, and now he's left to wonder, where are they taking it? So after all of the Thundercats got out of the tank, Snarf had suspicions that maybe the the mutants had repaired it somehow, but Panthro dismissed it and said that's impossible. And the reason why it's impossible because what Panthro says in his case, there was not enough time for the mutants to fix it. So the Thundercats now spotted tracks up ahead. So Chitara suspected that they've towed it somewhere, but the problem is where? Well, to investigate, Lionel does what he knows best, look through his sword's eye to tell him where the mutants are going. So he did. So, through the sword's eye, what the Sword of Omens had told Lionel that the mutants had taken the red Ratstar back to Castle Plundarr. So, Lionel knows where the mutants are going, to Castle Plundarr to fix up the Ratstar. But they have a mutank to tow it with. So, when Pedro said, a mutank, huh? So, Chitara asked Panthro a question. Shouldn't you be worried? So after Panthro had thought about Chitara's question and said that he isn't worried about it and shouldn't be a problem. So the Thunder Tank heads off to Castle Plundarr, just like they did in part 1. So later, back at Castle Plundarr, there's Stratoro along with the mutants that had just arrived there with the Red Ratstar and a mutank. So what the mutants did is that they were told by Ratoro to load up the vortex shells in the mutank, so that's what they did. So Ratoro told Vultureman of the mutants, saying, oh, by the way, make sure you fill up the mutank on the way. Should I have to do everything myself, he asked. And so all 4 of the mutants went ahead and went to work right away. But then suddenly Ratoro just heard the noise of a thunder tank that's coming from nearby. So, back with Ratoro, he lets the mutants know that the Thundercats are coming. I wonder what they've won, Jackalman said, though Monkey said that he isn't sure, but he knows exactly what the Thundercats are going to get. Now, Slythe, who agrees with Monkey to say, now it's about time when we see how big Ratoro is as he said he'd be. Well, Ratoro doesn't like it a bit, and he says, silence! I will say this, Ratoro says, whatever the Thundercats want, they're never going to get it, he said. Go into battle stations, Ratoro said. We'll meet up with the Thundercats, he suggested. So everybody went into the mutank. Then Ratoro also said that if the Thundercats can try to negotiate, then we can blast them. So the mutank is ready for action. So back with the Thunder Tank is still on his way to Castle Plundarr, but then Snarfer just told his uncle when he pleaded his case, he said maybe this isn't such a good idea. If we want to get back home, it is a good idea, Snarf said. What do you mean we? His nephew asked. So finally the Thunder Tank had arrived at Castle Plundarr. Not only that, but the Thundercats had some good news. They found the wreck of the Ratstar, but also there's a mutank that's parked in front of the castle. So, Lionel suggested to Panthro that maybe they should negotiate. But Panthro asked him a question. Since when did mutants ever listen to reason? Well, Lionel says, it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. You know Lionel's right, Tiger said when he begins to agree with him. We should negotiate. What do we got to lose? So Panthro agrees with Tiger and says, okay, but we gotta be careful about this. So the Thunder Tank is now on its way. So long story short, both of the tanks went on their way. The Mutank from the castle to the Thunder Tank, then the Thunder Tank all the way to the castle. Then both of the tanks collided for a while, just a little bit, and then after that both of the tanks stopped. So, Ratoro went first to speak in his case to Lionel. So we finally met, haven't we? I came to negotiate with you, Lionel said. And Ratoro says, really? So what's the deal? Ratoro asked. But Lionel didn't even realize is that the mutants are loading up the vortex shell in the mutank. So Rator says, as a matter of fact, why don't you come a little closer and you can tell us, he suggested. So long story short, back with the Thundercats and the Thunder Tank, they suspected it was all a trick. So when Lionel says, watch out, then the mutants had fired a vortex shell at the Thunder Tank. And once that it did, a tornado just came up from out of nowhere. And then, long story short, Chitara knows what to do. She uses the cannon to attack it. And then the tank suddenly, after that, took off. So back with the Thunderkins, after they got out of the tank, they threw the capsules at the tornado, and then it just disappeared. Then back with the two tanks, it was battling each other by spinning round and round in circles, of course. Long story short, back with the two tanks, they're still spinning around until the first Thundercat that got out of the tank was Lino. Then he looks over at the Ratstar that's still parked near the castle, so he ran first, and then Snarf and his nephew ran to catch up with him. So good news for Lino and the two Snarfs, they finally arrived at the wrecked Ratstar. So Lino says, let's go get that Mecha Condenser. So they all went inside. So, meanwhile, inside the Ratstar, the two Snarfs, along with Lino, looked around in the engine room. But when they got to the section to where the Mecha Condenser was at, they were in shock. That means the Mecha Condenser is gone. And that also means that someone or something must have stolen it. So after Lionel had suspected that someone had gotten there and stolen it first, and we know who that someone is. None other than Mumm-ra himself. So when Lionel realizes that Mumm-ra had taken the mecha condenser, so Mumm-ra asked him a question. Is this what you're looking for? Is this what you want? Give me the mecha condenser, Lionel said to Mumm-ra. Then Lionel says, it doesn't work for you. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mumm-ra says. I can use anything to overthrow the Thundercats, he said. So long story short, after Mumm-ra's power had accidentally put a hole in the Red Star's ceiling thanks to Lionel's sword, that's when Lionel saw Mumm-ra flying off, and that's when Lionel uses the rope from his claw shield to hook on Mumm-ra's case to fly along with him. So both Mumm-ra and Lionel flew off. Watching from down below were Snarf and his nephew. But now here comes a problem. The two Snarfs didn't even realize that someone was right behind them, and that someone was Rattoro. So Rattoro says, so, we've met again. And he grabs Snarfer. Snarf got upset with Rattoro and says, you put him down, and tries to attack Rattoro. But luckily for Snarf, he uses his tail to trip him. So after the two Snarfs ran off, that's when Rattaro looks up to see Lino with Mumm-ra. So he looks back at the Snarfs to threaten them by saying, I'll deal with you two later. And so after that, he heads off. So back with Mumm-ra and Lino still flying up in the air, and Mumm-ra still has the mecha condenser under his arm. So Lino tries to climb up on top of him. And so when he did, that's when Mumm-ra loses control and loses the mecha condenser. And so when both Mumm-ra and Lino were landing safely on the ground, that's when they both have a battle with each other. However, just when Lino was about to use his sword, just like what any good guy would, but then Mumm-ra says, well, curse you and your sword. Today is yours for now, he said. Then Mumm-ra pleads his case to say tomorrow may be my day, and soon after that he disappeared just before Lionel can attack. So meanwhile, back with Lionel, he was looking around for the mecha condenser somewhere because he knows it had fallen on the ground. But just when his sword was about to warn him of grave danger, that's when Rattoro appears out of nowhere and then tells Lionel this case. If you really want the mecha condenser so bad, then you had to battle with me for it first, he said. So that's just what Rattoro and Lionel did. They decided to have a sword combat with each other, back and forth and on and on. But then, long story short, after that sword combat, things are looking bad for Lionel when Rattoro decided to use the power of his rat's eyes on him. You're doomed, Lionel, Rattoro says, but just when things were looking bad, that's when, by surprise, Lionel calls his sword to him. Rattoro was shocked because he just couldn't believe what he just seen. So long story short, now that Lionel has his Sword of Omens into his hand, that's when Rattoro pleaded his case to say, forget it, your sword is no match for my rat's eyes, he said. So long story short, now that Lionel's sword has blocked the power of the rat's eyes, Lionel does what any good guy would do, project the Thundercat signal from his sword. So back with the Thundercats and the Thunder Tank, now that they have seen the signal, the first thing that the Thunder Tank did was to back up and then pushed forward, and then after that it knocked over the Tank. So the Thunder Tank is now on its way. So meanwhile, back with Lionel, he's still battling Rattaro with his sword. But then Rattaro saw that the Thunder Tank is coming. Then when Rattaro saw that the Thunder Tank was coming, he knew he couldn't stand a chance, so he told Lionel this case. You hadn't seen the last of me. So after that, he ran off. So finally, when the Thunder Tank showed up, well, good news for the Thundercats, they now have the hyperspace mega condenser that they need for the Feliner. So Panthro goes first to speak in his case to say, I guess you don't need help after all. So finally, it is now time for all of the Thundercats to leave, including Snarf and his nephew. So meanwhile, back at Caste, now that the hyperspace mega condenser is installed in the Feliner, it's now time for Snarfer to go back to the planet of Snarfs where he comes from. So now that the Feliner is all set and ready to go, but before that can happen, that's when Snarf shows up. So now that Snarf shows up with his suitcase, that's when Lionel asks him, what's wrong with you? I'm afraid I have a confession to make, Snarf said. What do you mean? Chitara asked. Well, Snarf confessed to everyone that he's leaving with his nephew to the planet of Snarfs, and now he's saying he's never coming back to Third Earth. When Wily Cat had asked Snarf why, that's when Snarf says that he's going with his nephew. So Panthro has his turn to ask a question. You mean you're going there just to visit? No, I'm afraid not, Snarf said. So Snarf pleaded his case to say he's going to stay at the planet of Snarfs forever. So Lionel has his turn to ask a question. You mean you're leaving us? So Snarf says, yes, I'm afraid I'm going to have to. But you can't, Lionel said. Can't you stay? You don't really mean this, do you? I'm afraid I do, Snarf said. You're all grown up now, so I don't think you need me anymore, he said. So when Lionel tries to convince Snarf otherwise that he's truly needed, but Snarf says, I'm afraid my mind's made up, he said. So Chitara told Panther, well, I guess we better get going then. So they're first aboard the Feliner. The next aboard the Feliner was Snarfer, who's Snarf's nephew. So Snarf wishes Lionel farewell. So Lionel says, goodbye, Snarf. I'm going to miss you. And so finally the Feliner takes off. Poor Lionel was very devastated. He knows that there was nothing he could do to change Snarf's mind otherwise. But at the last minute, the Feliner comes back. And after that, Snarf comes out to hug Lionel. He says, on second thought, what would you do without me? He asked. So you know what this means. That means since Snarfer is going home, that means Snarf is going to be sticking around with the Thundercats after all. So that ends episode 30 in part 2.